My wife confessed her affair. What she said next shattered me completely. The call came at 11:47 at night. I remember the exact minute because I'd been staring at the clock for hours, watching the red numbers blink like they were mocking me. My chest was doing that thing again, that tight, suffocating squeeze that had become my constant companion over the past 6 months. The bedroom was dark except for the glow of my phone screen, and somewhere in the house, the old refrigerator hummed its mournful song. Derek, we need to talk. Those 5 words. I knew. God, I knew. I'd known since the moment she started coming home later and later, since the perfume that wasn't hers on her blouses, since the way her thumb would flicker across her phone screen like a nervous bird whenever I walked into the room. I'd known, and I'd been too terrified to say it out loud, because once I said it, once I acknowledged it, it would become real, and real things can break you in ways that imagination never can. What is it, Jess? I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Everything okay? She was sitting up in bed beside me. I turned to look at her. In the dim light filtering through the blinds, her face was a map of exhaustion and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Determination, maybe. Or relief. It was the face of someone who had made an irrevocable decision and was about to pass the consequences on to someone else. I have something to tell you, she said. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything. My heart began to hammer so loudly I was sure she could hear it. I sat up against the headboard and pulled my knees to my chest, making myself small. I've never felt more naked in my life. I'm listening, I said. She took a breath. And then, with a calmness that cut me to my core, Jessica told me she had been sleeping with another man for months. Not a one-time mistake, not a drunken kiss at a work function, a full-blown, ongoing affair with a man named Brendan who worked at the same wellness clinic where she'd been taking those evening yoga and nutrition classes she'd signed up for 8 months ago. The room tilted. I felt the air leave my lungs in a single, violent whoosh, like someone had driven a fist straight into my solar plexus. My ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the sound of her voice. I tried to grab onto something, the headboard, the sheets, the edge of reality, but everything felt like it was sliding sideways. Derek? Her voice, from somewhere far away. Derek, are you hearing me? I heard her. I just couldn't process what she was saying. My wife, my Jessica, was telling me that every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 5 months, while I was working late at the construction site to cover the mortgage and the kids' tuition and the credit card bills that seemed to multiply like rabbits, she had been driving across town to a 1-bedroom apartment rented under a fake name and lying in the arms of a man I'd never even heard of until this very moment. I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who had kissed me goodbye every morning for 11 years. This woman who had cried in my arms when her first marriage fell apart. This woman whose body I knew better than my own, every scar, every freckle, every curve, had been giving pieces of herself to someone else, one stolen afternoon at a time. Who is he? I whispered. My voice sounded like someone else's. It doesn't matter who he is, she said, and the calmness in her tone was the most obscene thing I'd ever heard. What matters is that I need you to understand something. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. I felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. How long? I asked. Derek. How long, Jessica? She closed her eyes. Since March, she said quietly. March. 7 months. 7 months of her coming home smelling faintly of a different soap, of her phone buzzing at odd hours, of her suddenly caring about her appearance again after years of sweatpants and messy buns. 7 months during which I had attributed every sign to stress, to mid-30s malaise, to anything other than the truth that was now sitting right beside me in our marriage bed. I got up. I don't remember deciding to move, my body simply rose of its own accord, driven by some primal animal instinct that told me I needed to get out of this room before I said or did something irreversible. I walked to the kitchen in bare feet, my legs numb, my mind a roaring static. I opened the refrigerator and stared at nothing. Leftover spaghetti from 2 days ago. A carton of eggs. A half-drunk bottle of orange juice. The mundane inventory of a life that had just detonated. Behind me, I heard her get up. I heard her footsteps cross the bedroom floor. I heard the bathroom door click shut. She was going to brush her teeth. She had just destroyed our marriage and she was going to brush her teeth and probably wash her face and climb back into bed, and I was going to lie there next to her, awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster, the same ceiling I'd been staring at for 11 years, the same cracks I'd been meaning to patch since we moved in. I need to rewind. I need to go back to the beginning, because I think the only way I'm going to survive this, if I survive this, is to understand exactly where it all went wrong. And to understand that, I need to go back to the night I met Jessica Louise Palmer. It was October 2013. Autumn in Tucson, Arizona, the kind of evening when the desert air cools just enough to make you believe that life is actually bearable. I was 27 years old, 3 years out of a lackluster marriage to a woman named Cynthia who had left me for her dental hygienist, and I was working as a site supervisor for a mid-sized residential construction company owned by my uncle, Gerald. My life was small and predictable: wake up at 5:30, down 2 cups of diner coffee, supervise drywall installation on half-finished spec homes in the Catalina foothills, come home to a rented duplex on Speedway Boulevard, microwave something for dinner, watch the Diamondbacks lose, go to bed, repeat. I was not unhappy, exactly. I was numb. There's a difference. It was a Saturday night. I remember this because the game had ended early and I was bored out of my skull, and I did something I almost never did. I opened Tinder. I'd created the profile months ago with a terrible selfie in front of a half-built house, but I'd never actually used it. Tonight, something made me swipe. And that's how I found Jessica. Her profile photo was a mirror selfie, the kind every woman on every dating app has ever taken. She was dressed simply, her dark hair falling past her shoulders, her face bare of makeup. She wasn't stunning. She was something else. Comfortable. Real. Like someone you could sit across from at a kitchen table for the rest of your life and never run out of things to say. I swiped right. She matched me within minutes. Her name was Jessica. She was 23. She had recently moved to Tucson from Phoenix, escaped Phoenix, she wrote, though I didn't understand the distinction then, and she was in the middle of what she called the Great Life Reevaluation of 2013. Her words. She had left a job she hated, ended a marriage that had been dying long before either of them acknowledged it, and was starting from absolute zero in a city where she knew almost no one. I sound like a mess, don't I? She wrote in that first conversation. You sound like someone who's braver than you know, I replied. She sent me a string of laughing emojis. Then she asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. We met at a small cafe on Congress Street the next afternoon. She was wearing jeans and a cream-colored sweater and sneakers, and she looked younger than her photos, not in a deceptive way, but in the way that some people carry their years lightly, like they'd been kind to themselves. She was kinnier than I'd expected, with a round face and full lips and dark eyes that seemed to be studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away and never stop looking at the same time. She was quiet at first. We talked about the usual things: jobs, neighborhoods, why Tucson versus anywhere else. She told me she'd been married for 2 years to a man who turned out to be a different person than the one she'd married. She said it without bitterness, without drama, just a simple, factual statement delivered with the calm of someone who had already done the heavy emotional lifting and was now just standing in the aftermath. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," she replied. It needed to end. I liked her immediately. Not the fireworks and sparks kind of like that I'd felt with Cynthia, but something steadier. Something that felt like it could actually hold weight. We talked for 2 hours. When she stood up to leave, I walked her to her car, a beat-up Honda Civic that looked like it had survived the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, and before she opened the door, she looked up at me and said, "I had a really good time, Derek." So did I. "Come on," she said, a playful light in her eyes. "You can do better than that." I laughed. "Can I take you to dinner sometime? Like an actual dinner, with candles and everything?" She smiled, that wide, unguarded smile that would later become the most precious thing in my world. "I thought you'd never ask." I should tell you what kind of man I was back then. I was the kind who believed in things. Not in a naive, Pollyanna way. I'd been divorced, I'd seen the inside of a courthouse, I'd signed papers that dissolved the last legal tether to a woman I thought I'd spend my life with. But I still believed that love, real love, was something you built with your hands and your heart and your willingness to show up every single day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. I was also the kind of man who had very little money. My uncle's construction company paid me $3,200 a month, good money by Tucson standards, but not enough to make anyone feel secure. I had $4,000 in savings, a 12-year-old truck with a cracked windshield, and a duplex that smelled faintly of mold no matter how much bleach I used. I was not the kind of man who could offer a woman the world. I could offer her honesty, loyalty, and a sincere effort to make her laugh every day. It wasn't much. But it was everything I had. When I met Jessica, I felt like I'd been handed something fragile and extraordinary, a second chance that most people never get. I held it carefully. I held it like my life depended on it. And for a while, for a beautiful, blinding, breathless while, it was enough. The first 6 months were a blur of discovery. Jessica and I went on our first official date 3 days after the cafe meeting. I took her to a small Italian restaurant on Grant Road, nothing fancy, just red checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles, and we talked until the server started stacking chairs around us. She told me about her father, a stern, distant man who'd never quite figured out how to express affection, and her mother, a warm, chaotic woman who compensated for her husband's emotional absence by smothering her children in food and fussing. She told me about growing up in a suburb of Sacramento, California, about being a competitive swimmer in high school, about the scholarship she'd lost to a knee injury, about the slow drift into a marriage that had felt like a lifeboat but turned out to be a sinking ship. I told her about Cynthia. About how we'd met in college, how we'd been each other's first everything, how the romance had curdled into routine somewhere around year 3, how I'd come home one day to find her suitcases already packed. I told her I didn't blame her for leaving, I really didn't. We'd simply run out of love, and running out of love is not the same as doing something wrong. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Jessica said, and she reached across the table and took my hand. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that I can only describe as rightness. Like every wrong turn in my life had been leading me here, to this restaurant, to this woman's hand in mine. 3 weeks after our first date, I told her I loved her. I said it at the end of a Tuesday evening, standing in her kitchen, a cramped studio apartment on Miracle Mile with a window that didn't close properly and a neighbor who played merengue at full volume every Thursday at 7 p.m. She was making pasta. I was watching her cook. She turned around to ask me to pass the olive oil, and the way the kitchen light caught her face, the steam from the pot curling around her like a veil, I just said it. The words came out before I could stop them, stop think stop, which was how I'd always done the most important things in my life. I love you, I said. She went still. The spatula in her hand hovered midair. Then she set it down on the counter, walked over to me, and wrapped her arms around my neck. I love you too, she whispered into my ear. I've been trying not to say it because it seems too fast, but I do. We stood there in that cramped kitchen, in the apartment with the broken window and the merengue neighbor, and I felt something shift in my chest, a tectonic plate moving, rearranging the landscape of my entire life. I was going to marry this woman. I knew it with a certainty that felt almost geological. This was not a feeling. This was a fact. But there were things I didn't know. Things Jessica hadn't told me yet. Things that were sitting just beneath the surface of her calm, composed exterior like fault lines waiting for the right pressure. She was pregnant. Not when we met, she'd lost that baby, the baby from her previous marriage, 4 months along when she discovered her husband's infidelity and filed for divorce. She had the termination while she was still legally married, while she was still living under the same roof as a man who had betrayed her, alone in a hospital room except for a social worker who held her hand because there was no one else. She told me this 2 months into our relationship. We were lying in bed on a Sunday morning, the Arizona sun pouring through the blinds, her head on my chest, our legs tangled together under the sheets. I was stroking her hair when she said, almost casually, "There's something I need to tell you." I told her she could tell me anything. She lifted her head and looked at me with those dark, serious eyes, and she said, "When I was with my ex-husband, I was pregnant. 4 months. I had an abortion." I did the math in my head. That would have been almost a year ago. That was before she left Phoenix, before she came to Tucson, before we met. "Are you okay?" I asked. She blinked. She clearly hadn't expected that response. "Aren't you? Don't you have questions?" "Of course I have questions. But they're all about you and whether you're okay. That's the only thing that matters." She started to cry. Not delicate, pretty crying, full, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. I held her and let her. She cried for what felt like hours, and when she finally stopped, she told me the whole story. The discovery. The confrontation. The realization that the man she'd married had been sleeping with a coworker for over a year. The decision, because that's what it was, a decision, not a surrender, to terminate the pregnancy rather than bring a child into a marriage already poisoned by lies. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," she said, her voice raw. "And I have to live with that. Every single day." I kissed her forehead. I looked her straight in the eyes. "Whatever you have to live with," I said, "you don't have to live with it alone. Not anymore." A month later, she moved in with me. Her lease was up, my duplex had a second bedroom, and we were spending every night together anyway. It made sense. It felt right. We were two people who'd been through the ringer of love and come out the other side still believing, stupidly, stubbornly, magnificently, that it was worth it. She brought 4 suitcases and a box of books. I cleared out a closet for her. I bought a second toothbrush and put it next to mine in the bathroom. I printed a photo of us from our second date, at a street fair, both of us laughing at something off camera, and taped it to the refrigerator. Small acts. Sacred acts. The rituals of 2 lives fusing into one. We were married in April 2014, 7 months after we met. Small ceremony at the Pima County Courthouse, with my Uncle Gerald as the witness, and a reception at a Mexican restaurant on 4th Avenue where we ate too many tamales and danced to a three-piece band playing covers of Beatles songs. Jessica wore a simple white dress and cowboy boots. I wore a suit I'd bought at a thrift store for $40. She was radiant. I have never seen anyone more radiant in my entire life. Her mother drove down from Sacramento for the occasion. Her mother was everything Jessica had described: warm, loud, affectionate to the point of embarrassment, constantly pressing food into our hands and telling us how happy she was. Her father did not come. He had a prior commitment, which Jessica told me with a tight-lipped shrug that communicated volumes. She didn't cry at the ceremony. She smiled the whole time, that wide, unguarded smile, and when the judge pronounced us married and told me I could kiss my bride, I lifted her off her feet and kissed her like the world was ending, because in a way it was. The world we'd known as individuals was ending. A new one was beginning. The first year of marriage was, by most objective measures, a golden period. Jessica got a job as an administrative assistant at a real estate office downtown. I got a raise, $3,800 a month, still nothing to write home about, but an improvement. We moved out of the duplex and into a small 2-bedroom house in the Menlo Park neighborhood, a modest stucco place with a backyard big enough for a dog. We adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt from the county shelter we named Biscuit. Jessica was the kind of wife who left little notes on my lunch bag. Have a great day, handsome. Don't forget to eat lunch. I love you more than biscuits. A joke that only made sense if you knew the dog's name, which of course she did. She started teaching herself to cook, badly at first, spectacularly better within a year. She read voraciously, everything from self-help to historical fiction to trashy celebrity memoirs, and she would narrate the most absurd passages aloud to me while I pretended to be annoyed and was secretly delighted. She was lazy in some ways. I need to say this, because it was part of who she was, and I'm not interested in rewriting history or turning her into a saint she wasn't. She was not a natural homemaker. She would leave dishes in the sink overnight. She folded laundry like it was an act of violence. She could spend 4 hours reading a book and not once glance at the dust accumulating on the television. But she was also the most stimulating conversationalist I'd ever met. She had opinions about everything: politics, architecture, the ethics of artificial intelligence, the best hot dog stand in Tucson, and she was not afraid to defend them with a ferocity that I found alternately thrilling and exhausting. Do you ever just want to lie on the couch and watch TV like a normal person? I asked her once, during an argument about something I can't even remember. Normal is overrated, she replied. Normal is just a polite word for boring. I laughed. I couldn't help it. She was impossible and wonderful, and I was so completely, embarrassingly, unconditionally in love with her that I would have agreed to anything she said. In October 2014, 6 months into our marriage, Jessica became pregnant. We hadn't planned it, we were barely keeping our heads above water financially, but when she showed me the positive test, sitting on the edge of the bathtub with tears streaming down her face, I felt a joy so acute it was almost indistinguishable from pain. We're going to be parents, I said, and I knelt down in front of her and kissed her belly. Are you scared? She asked. Terrified, I said honestly. Good, she whispered. That means you're taking it seriously. The pregnancy was hard on her. She had severe nausea for the first 4 months. She couldn't keep anything down, not water, not crackers, not the ginger candies her mother mailed from Sacramento. She lost 8 pounds in the first trimester. I came home from work every day and found her lying on the couch, pale and depleted, Biscuit curled up beside her like a furry guardian. I cooked. I cleaned. I drove to 3 different pharmacies trying to find the specific brand of prenatal vitamins she could tolerate. I slept with one hand on her back because she said the pressure helped her stomach settle. I read every book I could find about pregnancy, childbirth, infant care. I was taking notes like a medical student, memorizing the stages of labor, the signs of postpartum depression, the correct way to swaddle a newborn. My Uncle Gerald noticed. "You've been distracted lately," he said one afternoon on the job site. "My wife's pregnant," I said, unable to keep the grin off my face. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Congratulations, nephew. That changes everything." He was right. It changed everything. But not in the ways I expected. Our son, Oliver, was born in June 2015. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Dark hair, just like Jessica's. A cry that sounded like a foghorn. The most beautiful, overwhelming, terrifying thing I had ever experienced. They placed him on her chest and she looked down at him with an expression I can only describe as reverence, like she was looking at a miracle she hadn't dared to believe in. "Look what we made," she whispered. I leaned over and kissed her sweaty forehead. "You made him," I said. "I just held your hand." She laughed. Then she cried. Then the nurse took Oliver to be weighed and measured and Jessica turned to me and said, very seriously, "I want 5 more of these." I laughed so hard I nearly fell out of my chair. I want to tell you about the period between Oliver's birth and the beginning of the end. I want to paint it in honest colors, because that period was real, and it was ours, and I refuse to pretend it was something it wasn't just because it ended badly. Those first 2 years with Oliver were hard in the way that all new parenthood is hard. We were broke. Not crisis broke, but persistently, grindingly broke, the kind of broke where you move numbers around on a spreadsheet every 2 weeks like a financial surgeon performing emergency triage. My uncle's company hit a rough patch in 2016, the Phoenix real estate market was softening and several of our biggest projects stalled. And there were months when my paycheck was late by a week, sometimes 2. We couldn't qualify for a larger mortgage. We couldn't take the vacation we'd been planning since the wedding. We drove the same cars we'd driven when we first met. Jessica was a devoted mother, but she was also restless. She had always been ambitious. She talked about going back to school, about starting her own business, about traveling the world with Oliver strapped to her chest in a baby carrier. She enrolled in an online business course and abandoned it after 6 weeks. She started a blog about minimalist living and wrote 3 posts. She researched RV living and convinced herself for about a month that we should sell the house and travel the country in an Airstream. I was patient with her. I was supportive. When she wanted to start the blog, I helped her set up the website. When she wanted to research the RV thing, I spent a weekend at the library printing out guides. But there was also a part of me that wished, and I felt guilty for this, God, I felt so guilty, that she would just settle. Just for a little while. Just until Oliver was in school and our finances stabilized and we had a little breathing room. "I just feel like I'm wasting my life," she said one night. Oliver was about 18 months old. We were in bed, lights out, the baby monitor casting a faint green glow across the ceiling. "You're raising our son," I said. "That's not wasting your life." "It's not enough," she said quietly. "What do you want, Jess? Tell me what you want and I'll help you get it." There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing in the dark. Then she said, "I don't know." That's the worst part. I don't know what I want. I just know I want something. I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't. I think about that sentence all the time now, in the aftermath of everything. I want something. What do you do with a person who wants something but can't name it? How do you fill a void when you don't know what shape it is? We had Oliver. We had Biscuit. We had a small house with a mortgage and a backyard where Oliver liked to dig in the dirt. We had dinner at the same Mexican restaurant every Friday because it was the one splurge we could afford. We had a life. It was small and ordinary, and it was ours. And somewhere in the grinding tedium of making ends meet and changing diapers and arguing about whose turn it was to get up at 3 a.m., the extraordinary thing that had brought us together, that electric, consuming, I love you more than biscuits feeling, began to fade into something quieter. Not gone. Not dead. Just quieter. Like a fire that settles into embers and gives off heat without flame. I told myself that was normal. Everyone told me that was normal. Marriage after the initial infatuation is supposed to settle into something steadier, something more sustainable. Flame burns out. Embers last. I was wrong. I was so dangerously wrong. The second child was not planned. Jessica had been on birth control but missed a dose during a weekend trip to Flagstaff to visit her mother. When she told me she was pregnant, Oliver was just over 2 years old, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Fear, yes. We were barely keeping our heads above water with one child. But there was also something else, a strange, involuntary flicker of hope. Of completeness. Are we insane? Jessica asked, laughing and crying at the same time. Probably, I said. But we're happy, right? We're happy. She hugged me. We're happy, she agreed. Our daughter, Mia, was born in March 2017. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. Dark hair like her brother, like her mother. Jessica's mother flew in from Sacramento and stayed for 3 weeks, filling our freezer with lasagnas and casseroles and pressing wads of cash into Jessica's hand with instructions to hire a cleaning lady, for God's sake. I loved Mia the moment I saw her. The same way I'd loved Oliver. It wasn't a gradual thing, a getting-to-know-you process. It was a bolt of lightning, a total event. She was mine. They were both mine. I had a family. A real, functioning, messy, loud, beautiful family. But something had shifted in Jessica during the second pregnancy. A door had closed. I felt it before she did, maybe. I noticed it in the way she stopped leaving me notes on the lunch bag around month 5. In the way she started staying up later and later, alone in the living room, scrolling through her phone. In the way she began referring to her body with a kind of detached disdain that made me want to reach through the screen of whatever app she was using and shake her. I look like a whale, she said one evening, 6 months postpartum, standing in front of the bathroom mirror in her underwear. You look like the mother of my children, I said. You look incredible. She didn't respond. She just stared at her reflection with those dark eyes, and I watched something flicker across her face, something I didn't recognize and couldn't name. The financial situation got worse before it got better. In 2018, my Uncle Gerald's company had to lay off half its staff, including me. I was devastated. I'd worked for Gerald since I was 17 years old, first as a gopher on job sites, then as a laborer, then as a supervisor. It wasn't just a job. It was my whole identity. My uncle was family. He was the closest thing I had to a father after my own dad died when I was 15. And now he was telling me he couldn't afford to keep me on the payroll. I'm sorry, Derek, Gerald said, his face gray with exhaustion. I would keep you if I could. You know that. I know, I said. I came home that night and told Jessica. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. "How long can we last?" she asked. "I have 3 months of severance. And I've already started looking." She nodded. She didn't yell at me. She didn't accuse me. But I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before, a spark of something cold and calculating. A version of Jessica that I didn't know. She went back to work 6 weeks later. A friend of a friend got her an interview at a wellness clinic downtown, a combination yoga studio, organic cafe, and holistic health center that catered to the crunchy luxe crowd in the Sam Hughes neighborhood. She got a part-time job as a front desk coordinator. 30 hours a week, $15 an hour, answering phones and scheduling appointments and trying to upsell clients on massage packages and nutritional supplements. It wasn't much. But she seemed to like it. She came home with new vocabulary, words like manifestation and gut health and adrenal fatigue. She started making smoothies with collagen powder and adaptogens. She bought a membership to the on-site yoga studio and began going to classes 3 or 4 times a week. "Good for you," I said. "I'm glad you're feeling energized." "I feel like myself again," she said. And for a while, I believed her. I found a new job within 3 months, site supervisor for a property management company that handled a large portfolio of rental homes in the Tucson area. The pay was similar, the hours were longer, and my commute was longer still. But it was steady. It was secure. And for a while, that was enough. Here is where the story turns. Here is where the ground begins to crumble beneath my feet. It started with small things. The way it always does. Jessica started going out. Not clubbing, she wasn't the clubbing type, but dinners, drinks, evening events at the wellness clinic. Networking, she called it. Building community. I didn't question it. She had spent the past 3 years as a stay-at-home mother in a small house in Tucson, and now she had a job with colleagues and social opportunities, and I was glad for her. I was glad she was building a life outside of me and the kids. Wasn't that what a healthy marriage looked like? 2 people with their own identities, their own passions, coming together as partners rather than dependents? She started taking better care of herself. Not in the holistic wellness way she'd been doing, in a more deliberate, almost aggressive way. She started going to a personal trainer twice a week. She changed her hair, shorter, more angular, with face-framing layers that made her look 10 years younger. She started wearing makeup again. Not the subtle, "I woke up like this" minimalism of our early dates, but actual makeup, mascara, lipstick, the works. "You look amazing," I told her one evening, watching her apply lipstick at the bathroom mirror. She was getting ready for a work event. A colleague's birthday party at a rooftop bar downtown. "Thank you," she said, without turning around. I watched her for a moment, my heart full of complicated pride. This was my wife. She was beautiful. She was alive. She was becoming more herself every day. "Have a great time," I said. She blew me a kiss in the mirror. "Don't wait up." I didn't wait up. I told myself this was trust. This was giving her space. This was being a modern husband who didn't need to monitor his wife's every move. I was a fool. The first time I felt something was wrong, it was June 2019. Jessica came home from a work event at 1:30 in the morning. I was awake, I'd been up with Mia, who had been fighting a fever all evening, and I heard her key in the lock, the soft click of the front door, the rustle of her coat as she hung it on the hook. She came into the living room and saw me sitting on the couch with Mia asleep in my arms. "Hey," she said. Her eyes were bright. Her cheeks were flushed. She smelled like expensive perfume, not the lavender and eucalyptus stuff she usually wore, but something sweeter, deeper, more exotic. Have a good time? I asked. It was great, she said. So great. She leaned down and kissed my cheek. I'll take Mia to bed. You should sleep. Jess. She paused. Yeah? Nothing. Go ahead. She took Mia from my arms and carried her down the hallway to her bedroom. I sat on the couch for another 20 minutes, staring at nothing. The perfume. That was the thing. She never wore that perfume. She had a signature scent, a $40 bottle from Target that she'd been loyal to for years, and this was something else entirely. Something that wasn't ours. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was projecting my own insecurities onto her. I told myself that marriages survive by not turning molehills into mountains, by choosing trust over surveillance, by giving your partner the benefit of the doubt. I was right to be suspicious. But I was wrong about what it meant. A month later, I came home early from work and found Jessica sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in her hands. She was smiling, that private, inward smile that people wear when they're reading something meant for no one else. I came in the front door and said her name and her smile vanished like smoke. Her thumb flickered, the same nervous bird-like movement I'd noticed before, and she locked the phone and set it face down on the table. Hey, she said. You're home early. Meeting got cancelled. I looked at the phone. Everything okay? Fine. Just checking email. She didn't look at me. She stood up and walked to the refrigerator and opened it and stared inside, as if the leftover containers and condiments held answers to questions she hadn't asked. You're being weird, I said, attempting lightness. She laughed. It was the wrong kind of laugh, too quick, too sharp. I'm not being weird. You're being weird. I'm being weird. Yes. You're being weird. I dropped it. I didn't push. I made dinner and we ate together and put the kids to bed and watched half of a movie we both agreed was terrible, and when Jessica yawned and said she was going to bed, I said goodnight and stayed on the couch for another hour, staring at the blank television screen, my mind a carousel of doubts I couldn't stop spinning. That night, I went to bed after she was asleep. I lay next to her in the dark, watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing, and I did something I had never done before in our entire relationship. I picked up her phone from the nightstand. She was sleeping like the dead, which she always did after even one glass of wine, and I unlocked it. Her passcode was our wedding anniversary. Of course it was. I opened her messages. Scrolled through her contacts. Most of it was mundane, work schedules, mom group texts, confirmation numbers for online orders. Then I found a name I didn't recognize. Not a woman, a man. Brendan. No last name. Just Brendan. The conversation was extensive, hundreds of messages stretching back weeks, and I scrolled through them quickly, my heart pounding in my ears, my hands trembling. They were flirty. Playful. Intimate in a way that was unmistakably romantic. He called her J. She called him B. They talked about their days, their dreams, their fears. He sent her song lyrics. She sent him photos of her food. He told her she was absolutely magnetic. She told him he was the most interesting person she'd talked to in years. I put the phone back on the nightstand. I lay down. I stared at the ceiling. It was 2:47 in the morning. The same time as the call that would come 8 months later. The same ceiling. The same cracks in the plaster. I knew then. Not with certainty, I didn't have proof, not the kind that would hold up in any court of law or logic, but I knew. Brendan was not a colleague. Brendan was not a friend. Brendan was something else entirely. And Jessica was slipping away from me like water through a sieve, one flirtatious text at a time. I made a decision that night. I chose not to confront her. I chose not to blow up the marriage over a text conversation that could be explained away as innocent friendship. I chose to believe in the Jessica I married. The Jessica who had cried in my arms about the abortion. The Jessica who had written "I love you more than biscuits" on a post-it note and stuck it to my bathroom mirror. The Jessica who had looked at our newborn son like he was the answer to every question she'd ever asked. I chose to believe that if I was patient enough, attentive enough, if I loved her hard enough, she would come back to me. So I became a different man. I became the husband I thought she wanted. I started picking up her dry cleaning without being asked. I started doing the grocery shopping on my way home from work, memorizing the brands she liked, the flavors she craved. I enrolled Mia in a preschool program so Jessica would have more free time. I hired a babysitter on Friday nights so we could have date nights, real date nights, with reservations at restaurants we'd been wanting to try and conversations that didn't involve poop schedules or daycare wait lists. I bought her flowers every Thursday. Roses, usually, because she said she loved the smell of roses, even though rose perfume made her sneeze. I know, it's a contradiction I never fully understood, but I stopped questioning the small mysteries of my wife years ago. I planned weekend trips. Palm Springs. Sedona. A 2-night stay at a bed and breakfast in Tubac that her coworker had recommended. I was relentless in my campaign of romantic rehabilitation. I was going to win her back not through confrontation but through performance, through the sheer, stubborn force of being the best husband I could possibly be. It worked. For about 6 weeks, it worked beautifully. She responded to my overtures. She laughed at my jokes again. She started leaving me notes on the refrigerator again, not "have a great day, handsome," but "thank you for this weekend, Derek." I needed it. She started kissing me goodbye in the mornings instead of just waving from the doorway. She started asking about my day, really asking, with follow-up questions and opinions and the engaged, curious energy that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. One night, after the kids were asleep and we were finishing a bottle of wine on the back porch, she reached over and took my hand and said, "I love you, you know that?" "I know," I said. "I love you too." "I'm glad we have this," she said. "I'm glad we made it a priority." "We always will," I said. I believed it. In that moment, I believed every word of it. But Brendan didn't go away. Brendan was still in her phone, in her thoughts, in the hidden geography of a life she was building parallel to the one she shared with me. And I was fighting a battle on a front I couldn't see, against an enemy I didn't know, using weapons I didn't understand. I was doomed from the start. The first time I saw him, really saw him, in the flesh, was an accident. I was driving down Speedway Boulevard on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I'd left work early to pick up Oliver from soccer practice. And there, crossing the parking lot of a strip mall, were Jessica and a man. He was tall, a good 4 or 5 inches taller than me. Dark hair, prematurely silver at the temples, the kind of distinguished salt and pepper look that women seem to find irresistible. He was wearing khakis and a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was laughing at something Jessica had said. She was laughing too, that wide, unguarded laugh that I had always thought belonged to me, to our family, to our life. They got into the same car, a late-model Subaru Outback, silver, and drove away. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Walgreens for 20 minutes. I called Jessica's phone. She answered on the second ring. Hey, where are you? I asked. At work. Why? Just checking in. What are you doing? I'm scheduling appointments. Derek, is everything okay? You sound weird. I wanted to say, I just saw you in a parking lot with a man who is not me. I want you to tell me who he is and why you were laughing like he was the funniest person you'd ever met. I want you to tell me this is nothing. Tell me you're not falling in love with someone else. Tell me our marriage is still the most important thing in your life. Instead I said, nothing. Just wanted to hear your voice. That's sweet, she said. I'll see you at home. She hung up. I sat in the Walgreens parking lot until Oliver called my phone and asked where I was. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I told Jessica I was going to run an errand after work, and instead I drove back to the strip mall. I parked across the street and waited. At 5:47, the clinic's front door opened and Brendan walked out, alone this time. He got into the silver Subaru and drove east on Speedway, and I followed him at a safe distance until he turned into a residential neighborhood on the east side of town. He pulled into the driveway of a small, well-maintained house with a desert landscaping and a truck in the driveway. A man's truck. A man who lived alone, apparently, because no one else got out. I memorized the address. 3847 East 23rd Street. Tucson, Arizona. When I got home that night, Jessica was in the kitchen making dinner. She kissed me when I walked in. She asked how my day was. She told me Oliver had a play date on Saturday and did I mind driving him. Everything okay, she asked, because I was standing in the doorway like a zombie, still wearing my work boots, still holding my keys. Yeah, I said. Long day. I told myself I needed more evidence. That's what I told myself. I wasn't ready to confront her, not with a single observation and a license plate number. I needed to be sure. I needed to catch her in a lie so undeniable that she couldn't talk her way out of it. I needed ironclad, bulletproof, inarguable proof. So I became a private investigator. A pathetic, lovesick private investigator with a day job and 2 kids and a wife who thought he was running errands. I started tracking her. Quietly. Methodically. I bought a GPS tracker, one of those small magnetic devices you can hide under a car, and installed it on the underside of her Honda while she was in the shower one morning. I told myself it was for emergencies. If she got into an accident, I would know where she was. That was the story I told myself. That was the lie that let me sleep at night. The tracker told me things I didn't want to know. It told me she was going to 3847 East 23rd Street 3 or 4 times a week, usually in the afternoon, usually for an hour or 2. It told me she was sometimes stopping at a storage facility on Grant Road. It told me she was going places that had nothing to do with work, nothing to do with the kids, nothing to do with me. I didn't tell her what I knew. I came home every night and kissed her and asked about her day and helped with dinner and bathed the kids and read them bedtime stories, and all the while the tracker in my pocket was feeding me a map of betrayal that I was compiling like evidence in a trial where I was both the prosecutor and the defendant. She was still going to work. She was still doing the yoga, the smoothies, the holistic wellness routine that had become her identity. But she was also stealing hours, my hours, our hours, the fabric of our marriage, and weaving them into something else. Something private. Something that didn't include me. I started to lose weight. I lost my appetite, everything tasted like sawdust and ash. I stopped sleeping. I would lie in bed next to Jessica and listen to her breathe and run calculations in my head, the hours she was spending at Brendan's house, multiplied by the number of weeks since I'd first discovered the messages, divided by the total hours in our marriage. The math was monstrous. The math told me that for every hour I was home with her, truly present with her, engaged and loving and trying, she was spending a portion of that same hour with him. I confronted her once, in November. I couldn't take it anymore. "Who's Brendan?" I asked, very casually, as we were eating breakfast. She froze. The piece of toast halfway to her mouth, suspended in the air like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence she hadn't finished writing. "What?" she said. "Brendan. You talk about him all the time. From the clinic." "Who is he?" She set the toast down. She picked up her coffee. She took a sip. Her hands were perfectly steady. "He's a friend from work," she said. "Why? Why do you talk to him so much?" "Because we get along, Derek. Not everyone who talks to the opposite sex is having an affair." "I didn't say you were. But you were thinking it." She looked at me with those dark eyes, and I saw something harden in them, a wall going up, brick by brick. "Do you not trust me?" "Of course I trust you." "Then why are you asking me about Brendan?" "I'm not asking you about Brendan. I'm just curious." She shook her head. "I don't like this, Derek. I don't like being interrogated over a friend." "I'm sorry," I said. "You're right. I'm sorry." She didn't accept the apology. She finished her coffee in silence, put her dishes in the sink, and left for work without saying goodbye. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands around a cup of coffee I hadn't drunk and felt the full weight of what I'd done. I'd confronted her badly. I'd given her a warning shot and let her see my hand. And now she knew that I knew, or suspected, at least, and everything was going to get harder from here. She started locking her phone. New passcode, not our wedding anniversary anymore, not Oliver's birthday, not anything I could guess. She started keeping it in her purse, which she took to the bathroom with her when she showered. She stopped texting in my presence. She became a vault, locked, silent, impenetrable. Meanwhile, Brendan was expanding his footprint in our lives. I would find evidence of him everywhere. A receipt from a restaurant I didn't recognize. A charger I didn't own plugged into the wall next to her side of the bed. A text notification on the car stereo that said, "Miss you already, Jay," and when I asked her about it, she said it was a colleague talking about a client. Every lie was a small act of violence. Not against me specifically, against the truth. Against the possibility that we could have navigated this honestly, even if the navigation led to the end. I would have preferred divorce to deception. I would have taken the wound over the slow poison. But she didn't give me that. She gave me secrecy, and I gave her surveillance, and somewhere in that grotesque exchange we were both losing pieces of ourselves that we would never get back. In December, she told me she wanted to go to Phoenix for a work conference. A weekend wellness retreat at a resort in Scottsdale. She showed me the brochure, Reiki training, sound bath healing, raw food nutritionals. It sounded legitimate. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing she would be into. "Sure," I said. "Sounds great." I pulled up the resort's website that night after she went to sleep. The conference was real. The retreat was real. But the dates she told me she was going, Friday through Sunday, didn't match the dates on the registration. The conference ran Thursday through Saturday. Which meant she would be gone from Thursday night to Monday morning, 4 days total, and only 2 of those days were accounted for by the official event. I didn't say anything. I smiled and helped her pack her bag. I kissed her at the airport, or what I told myself was an airport, She said she was flying out of Tucson International, but the Uber receipt I found in her phone when she got back showed a pickup from our house to Phoenix Sky Harbor, 40 minutes away. She came back Sunday evening with a sunburn and a story about a group excursion to the Grand Canyon. She showed me photos on her phone, landscapes, mostly. Blue sky. Red rocks. A group of women in matching resort shirts smiling at the camera. Where's the canyon? I asked, because I recognized the rock formations. They were from Sedona, not the Grand Canyon, which was 2 hours further north and looked nothing like the red sandstone spires of Sedona's Oak Creek Canyon. She looked at the photo. It's a viewpoint off the highway, she said smoothly. The light was incredible. I nodded. I didn't push. I was running out of energy for pushing. That night, in bed, she rolled over and put her hand on my chest and said, I missed you. I missed you too, I said. And I meant it. I missed her. I missed the Jessica who left notes on the refrigerator and laughed at her own jokes and looked at me like I was the only man in the room. I missed who she used to be when we were first married. I missed who I used to be when I still believed that love was enough to carry us through anything. I wasn't sure either of those people still existed. In January, she told me she wanted to open her own wellness studio. She had been thinking about it for months, she said. She had the expertise, she had the network, she had a vision. She wanted to lease a small space in the Sam Hughes neighborhood, a 2-room storefront that used to be a vintage clothing shop. She had found the listing online. She had already talked to the landlord. It's going to be expensive, I said. I know. But it'll be worth it. It'll give me something that's mine. We don't have the capital for something like this, Jess. We're still recovering from the severance. We have 2 kids in daycare. I can get a loan. I can find investors. I can make it work. I didn't want to crush her dream. I had spent our entire marriage trying not to crush her dreams. So I said yes. I said yes because I was tired, because I loved her, because saying no felt like another way of losing her. She got a business loan for $28,000. She maxed out 2 credit cards. She spent 6 weeks renovating the space, picking out paint colors and purchasing massage tables and ordering a custom sign with her studio's name in a font she'd agonized over for days. The total investment was close to $40,000, most of it borrowed. She opened the studio in March. A grand opening with complimentary yoga sessions and healthy refreshments. I came with the kids. I cut a ribbon and kissed her cheek and posed for photos with the community board members who'd shown up to support her. She was incandescently happy that day. I photographed her standing in the doorway of her own business, the afternoon sun catching her face, her smile as wide and unguarded as it had been on our wedding day. 3 months later, the studio was failing. She hadn't attracted enough clients. The rent was $3,200 a month and she was covering it with credit card advances. The massage therapist she'd hired quit. The yoga instructor she'd contracted demanded to be paid up front. I was paying off her credit cards with money from my paycheck. Our joint account was a battlefield of bounced fees and over-limit warnings, and I was beginning to understand the shape of the trap we'd fallen into. This is killing us, I said one night, trying to keep my voice level. Financially, Jess. We can't sustain this. I just need more time, she said. It's going to take time to build a client base. We don't have time. We have credit cards that are on fire and a mortgage we can barely make. We have 2 kids who need new shoes. We need to close the studio. No. Her voice was flat. Final. I'm not giving up on this. This isn't about giving up. This is about survival. You don't support me, she said. You never have. The argument escalated. It followed the trajectory of every argument we'd been having for the past year, starting with the specific and spiraling into the existential, each of us cataloging the other's failures until the original grievance was buried under an avalanche of grievances. By the end of that week, I was paying $800 a month toward her studio's operating costs on top of everything else. I was working Saturdays to cover the gap. I was taking out cash advances on my own credit cards. I was drowning, and Jessica was still going to Brendan's house 3 times a week, and I was still pretending I didn't know. The message I found in April was the one that broke me. I was borrowing her iPad to look something up for work. She had left it on the kitchen counter, unlocked, because she'd gotten comfortable again, relaxed her vigilance. A notification appeared at the top of the screen. A message from Brendan on something called Signal, an encrypted messaging app I'd never heard of. The message said, "Come over tomorrow. I need to see you. I've missed you so much this week." I sat down at the kitchen table. I read it again. And then I opened the entire conversation and scrolled. There were thousands of messages. Photos. Voice notes. A whole history of a relationship conducted in secret, in the margins of our marriage, while I was at work and she was supposed to be at the studio or picking up the kids. There were messages about Brendan meeting Oliver at a school event, a field trip that Jessica had volunteered for, and how Oliver had liked him. How Mia had called Brendan the nice at a park, which Jessica corrected to Uncle, a slip that suggested how frequently he was around, how familiar he had become with the architecture of our family life. There were messages the weekend of the Phoenix trip. Brendan had gone with her. They had stayed at a boutique hotel in Old Town Scottsdale, the same hotel whose name appeared on the receipt she'd deleted from her Uber history. They had shared a room. They had gone to the Grand Canyon together, not the group excursion she'd photographed, but a private, 2-day road trip, just the two of them, leaving our family life behind like a set of costumes they could take off and hang in a closet. There were messages from the previous week. Brendan telling Jessica he loved her. Jessica saying it back. I closed the app. I set the iPad back on the counter. I walked outside and stood in the backyard, in the dark, in the cold desert air, and I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw and my chest was burning and Biscuit was barking at me from the dog door like I'd lost my mind. I had lost my mind. Or found it, found the edge of it, the place where sanity gives way to something primal and howling. I stood in my backyard at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night in April, and I understood for the first time that my marriage was over. Not failing. Not struggling. Over. It had been over for months, maybe longer, and I had been standing in the wreckage pretending there was still a house standing. I did not confront her that night. I did not confront her the next day, or the day after that. Instead, I called in sick to work, the first time I'd called in sick in 3 years, and I drove. I drove to the lake outside of town, to a spot I'd discovered years ago with Cynthia, a place where the water meets the desert and everything is quiet. I sat on the hood of my truck for 6 hours and I thought. I thought about Oliver and Mia. I thought about the father I wanted to be and the father I was capable of being. I thought about the man Jessica had married and the man Brendan was offering her, probably someone who made 3 times my salary, someone with salt and pepper hair and a Subaru and a house in a neighborhood where the lawns were green and the cars in the driveways were new. Someone who could give her the life she kept insisting she deserved. I thought about what I had done wrong. And here is the terrible, unbearable truth, I couldn't find a single thing. I had been loyal. I had been supportive. I had bent over backwards to accommodate her ambitions, her dreams, her restlessness. I had paid for her studio. I had tracked her because I was desperate, not because I was controlling. I had loved her with everything I had. And it still wasn't enough. That was the worst part. Not the betrayal, though the betrayal was its own apocalypse. The worst part was that I had done everything right, and it still wasn't enough, and that meant the failure wasn't something I could fix with more effort or more patience or more love. The failure was structural. It was baked into the foundation of who we were as a couple. And some failures are just beyond repair. I drove home that night. I walked in the front door. Jessica was sitting on the couch with a book. She looked up and said, "Hey. Are you okay? You missed dinner." "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine. Just needed some air." She studied my face. I don't know what she saw there, maybe exhaustion, maybe grief, maybe the particular blankness of a man who has just accepted the unacceptable. She started to say something, then stopped. "I'm going to bed," I said. "Long day tomorrow." I kissed her on the forehead. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, 41 years old, gray at the temples, lines around my eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked like a man who had been running a marathon with no finish line in sight. I slept in the guest room that night. I told her I was coming down with something and didn't want to risk giving it to the kids. It was the first time we'd slept in separate rooms since Mia was born, and she was breastfeeding and I was working nights to cover Gerald's payroll gap. She didn't ask any questions. She said goodnight and turned off her light, and that was that. The silence between us was louder than any argument we had ever had. The confession, when it finally came, was almost a relief. She sat me down on a Saturday morning in May. Oliver was at a friend's house. Mia was napping. She made me coffee, a peace offering, or maybe a preparation. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and she looked me in the eyes and she said, "I have something to tell you. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." My stomach dropped. My heart began its old hammer dance. I set my coffee cup down on the table with a precision that surprised me. My hands were steady even though everything inside me was collapsing. "I'm listening," I said. She told me. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. She told me she had been seeing someone. She told me it was Brendan. She told me it had started as emotional, just talking, just connecting, and had become physical about 3 months in. She told me she had tried to end it twice and failed both times. She told me she felt guilty but also alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. "I don't know what I want," she said. "I know that's not fair to you. I know I should have figured this out before I let it go this far. But I didn't. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Derek." I sat very still. I had imagined this conversation 100 times in my head, in the shower, in the car, in the dark of the guest room, and now that it was actually happening, I felt strangely detached from it. Like I was watching myself in a movie, playing a character who was supposed to react but hadn't been given his lines yet. "How long?" I asked. She told me. "Since March of the previous year." 14 months. 14 months. More than a year of my wife in someone else's arms. More than a year of our marriage being a facade. More than a year during which I had worked myself to exhaustion trying to save something she had already abandoned. "Brendan," I said, tasting the name. "Tell me about him." She did. She told me he was 38. Divorced for 5 years, no children. He worked as a financial analyst for a firm in Phoenix and supplemented his income with consulting work. He was kind, she said. Genuinely kind. He listened to her. He made her feel seen. He challenged her intellectually and made her laugh and never made her feel like she was too much or not enough. He sounds perfect, I said. He's not perfect, she said. Nobody's perfect. You're right, I said. Nobody is. Including me. She started to cry. I didn't. I was past crying. I had done all my crying in the dark of the guest room, in the bathroom after everyone had gone to sleep, in the parking lot of the Walgreens where I'd first seen them together. I had cried so much in the previous months that I felt wrung out, hollowed, like a shell of the man I used to be. Derek, I still love you, she said. This isn't about not loving you. Then what is it about? She took a long breath. I think I married you because I was scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of being broke. Scared of starting over. And you've been good to me, you've been so good to me. But I'm not happy. I haven't been happy in a long time. And I don't think it's because of anything you've done. I think it's because I married the wrong person for the right reasons and now I have to live with that. The wrong person for the right reasons. I turned that phrase over in my mind like a stone in my pocket. It was the cruelest thing she could have said, because it was almost kind. It wasn't an attack. It was a diagnosis. It was her telling me, as gently as she possibly could, that I had done everything right and she had still chosen someone else. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the coffee cup against the wall. I could have called Brendan and threatened to end his bloodline. I could have driven to his house at 3847 East 23rd Street and done something unspeakable to the man who had been taking my wife's heart and body and time while I was changing diapers and paying credit card bills and lying awake at night wondering what I was doing wrong. Instead, I said, "What do you want to do?" She wiped her eyes. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what I want." We sat at that kitchen table for 4 hours. We talked about everything, the marriage, the kids, the studio, the money, the lies, the loneliness, the slow drift that had carried us to this moment. I told her about the GPS tracker. She told me she had suspected. I told her about the signal messages. She told me she knew I'd found them. We were two people who had been lying to each other for so long that the truth felt like a foreign language, difficult to speak, almost impossible to understand. I told her I wanted to save the marriage. She said she didn't know if it could be saved. I told her I would do anything, individual therapy, couples therapy, a complete lifestyle overhaul, moving to a different city, anything. She said she needed time. I'll give you time, I said. But not forever. I have limits, Jess. I'm a person too. And I have limits. She nodded. She looked at me with those dark eyes, the same eyes I'd looked into at the cafe on Congress Street 12 years ago, the same eyes that had looked at our newborn son like he was a miracle, the same eyes that had been looking at Brendan across a dinner table or a pillow or the hood of a Subaru for the past 14 months. Okay, she said. Let's try. We tried. For 2 months, we tried. I went to individual therapy, Dr. Lamb, a calm, methodical woman with a framed degree on the wall and a box of tissues on the side table. I told her everything. The GPS tracker. The gaslighting I'd both received and, in my surveillance mode, perpetrated. The slow erosion of trust that had calcified into a kind of armed truce. Dr. Lamb listened and nodded and gave me homework. Practice assertive communication, identify my attachment style, read a book called Attached about anxiety in relationships. Jessica went to her own therapist. A man named Dr. Rourke, older, with a gray beard and an office full of plants. She came home from her sessions with insights she would share with me, carefully, like she was testing the waters. "I think I use busyness to avoid intimacy," she said one evening. "I think I've been running from vulnerability my whole life." "That's probably true," I said. "I'm working on it." "Okay." We went to couples therapy twice. Dr. Lamb facilitated. We sat in her office on a Tuesday evening, across from each other in armchairs, and we talked about the affair, about the lies, about the years of financial stress that had worn us both down to nubs. Jessica admitted that she had used the chaos of our financial situation to justify her emotional withdrawal. I admitted that I had smothered her in the name of love, that my need to fix things, to solve problems, to be the hero of my own marriage narrative, had prevented me from seeing what she actually needed, which was space. "I didn't need you to fix me," she said. "I needed you to sit with me in the mess." "Why didn't you tell me that?" "Because I didn't know how. And because part of me wanted you to just know. To read my mind. To be the perfect husband who intuited my every need without me having to articulate it. I know that's unfair. I'm working on it." We held hands in Dr. Lamb's office. We cried. We talked about Oliver and Mia and the life we'd built and whether there was anything left worth saving. Dr. Lamb asked us to identify 3 things we still loved about each other. "I love that Derek shows up," Jessica said. "He's always there. He's never not there." "I love that Jess makes me laugh," I said. "Even now. Even in the middle of this. She still makes me laugh." It was true. In the worst moments of our marriage, in the therapy sessions and the screaming matches and the long, silent car rides home from places neither of us wanted to go, Jessica could still make me laugh. It was her most disarming quality. The thing that had made me fall in love with her at a cafe on Congress Street. The quality I feared losing most. We were given exercises. Communicate one vulnerable thing to your partner every day. Plan one shared activity per week that has nothing to do with the kids or the household logistics. No talking about the affair during meals. No silent treatments lasting longer than 24 hours. We followed the rules. We were model patients. We were 2 people in therapy, doing the work, reading the books, filling out the worksheets, determined to save something that had been dying by degrees for years. And then, one night in July, she came home late from the studio and I saw a text on her watch, her Apple Watch, which she wore constantly, which buzzed on her wrist during dinner and bath time and bedtime stories. The text was from Brendan. It said, "Thinking about you. Can't wait for tomorrow." She saw me see it. We both froze. "I thought we agreed," I said quietly. "We did. And we are. He reached out." I didn't respond. "You're wearing his message on your wrist, Jess." "That's not responding. That's carrying him around with you all day." She took the watch off. She set it on the counter. She looked at me with an expression I had seen before, the wall going up, brick by brick. "I'm trying," she said. "This is hard. Everything is hard. This is supposed to be hard. That's what it means to rebuild something. It's supposed to be hard." "I know. Do you?" "Because I'm not sure you do." She didn't answer. She picked up her watch and went to the bathroom and closed the door. I heard the water running. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the refrigerator, covered in Oliver's drawings and Mia's stickers and the remnants of our family's brief, imperfect, precious life, and I felt something inside me go quiet. Not calm. Not peace. Quiet. The silence of a door closing. The quiet of a man who has finally stopped fighting for something that was never going to be his no matter how hard he held on. Jessica moved out in August. It wasn't dramatic. There was no suitcase in the hallway showdown, no slammed door, no screaming match on the front lawn. She told me, calmly, in the kitchen, while I was making the kids' lunches for the next day. She had found an apartment. She was going to sign the lease. She wanted shared custody. She wanted 50-50, alternating weeks. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay? If that's what you want. I'll have the papers drawn up. She started to cry again. She cried so much in those last few months. It was like her body was trying to evacuate every last drop of the tears she'd been holding back for years. I put my arm around her and I held her, and for a moment it felt like the old days, like we were two people who still belonged to each other, who still fit together in the way that married people do, in the quiet intimacy of shared meals and shared space and the thousand small acts of daily life. I'm sorry, she said into my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Derek. I know. I tried. I really tried. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that trying for 2 months after a year-long affair and 4 years of slow withdrawal was not the same as trying. I didn't say it because it didn't matter anymore. The marriage was over. The only question left was how we would conduct the wreckage. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment on Craycroft Road, near the airport. She decorated it simply, a futon, a bookshelf, a small dining table she'd found at a thrift store. The apartment of a woman who had shed a life and was figuring out what came next. She didn't bring Brendan there immediately, or at least not while the kids were with her. She was careful about that, maintaining the boundaries, protecting Oliver and Mia from having to process the full reality of their mother's new life all at once. He was there when I dropped off Oliver's soccer cleats one evening. I hadn't called ahead. I'd promised Jessica I'd give her 24 hours notice before any unscheduled visits, but Oliver had forgotten them and I was already in the car and it was on the way. I knocked on the door. She answered. Behind her, in the living room, I could see Brendan sitting on the futon with a glass of wine. For a moment, none of us moved. Sorry, I said. I'll come back. No, it's fine. She took the cleats. Oliver needs these for practice tomorrow. Okay. I turned to leave. Brendan stood up and said, very politely, Hey, Derek. I looked at him. Tall, silver-templed, blue eyes, the kind of man who looked like he exercised and ate salmon and had opinions about asset allocation. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, which was something, I suppose. A small concession to the gravity of the situation. Brendan, I said. Good to put a face to the name. I drove home. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, engine off, staring at the stucco facade of the house I'd been paying a mortgage on for 9 years. The house where my son had taken his first steps. The house where I'd held my newborn daughter and promised her the world. The house that had been our family home, our refuge, our shared life, and now it was just a house. A monument to something that used to exist. The divorce was finalized in October. 14 months from the day she told me the truth. It was, as these things go, relatively civilized. We split the assets evenly, the house would be sold, proceeds divided. The studio went to Jessica, along with its debt. The cars were divided. The savings, such as it was divided. Custody was 50-50. Alternate weeks. Oliver had soccer practice on Wednesdays, Mia had dance class on Tuesdays. We used a shared calendar app to coordinate. We communicated through a co-parenting app that filtered our messages and kept the tone professional and neutral. The first week alone, truly alone, no Jessica, no kids, was the longest week of my life. I didn't know what to do with myself. I ate cereal for dinner every night and watched baseball games that I didn't care about and went to bed at 8:30 because there was no one to stay up with, no one to talk to, no one to fill the silence. I started running. 3 miles a day, then 5, then 8. I ran in the early morning, before the sun came up, when Tucson was still cool and quiet and the desert smelled like creosote and mesquite. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached and I couldn't think about Jessica or Brendan or the 1,000 small moments of our marriage that I couldn't stop replaying in my head. I joined a men's group, something Dr. Lamb had recommended. A group of 6 divorced or divorcing men who met every Thursday evening at a church community center to talk about their feelings like civilized adults. There was Phil, a former high school history teacher whose wife had left him for a man she'd met at her book club. There was Greg, a contractor like me whose ex-wife had custody of their 3 kids and most of his retirement savings. There was Carlos, a soft-spoken accountant who'd been married for 22 years and still wore his wedding ring, even though he'd been divorced for 3. Does it get better? I asked Phil one evening, after the group session. It gets different, he said. Whether that's better depends on what you make of it. I didn't find that particularly helpful, but I kept coming back. There was something valuable about sitting in a circle with men who had been through the same thing, who knew the specific, crushing weight of being left, of being replaced, of having to learn how to live inside a life that looked nothing like the one you'd planned. 6 months after the divorce, I went on my first date. Her name was Rachel. She was a pediatric nurse at Banner Children's Hospital, 44 years old, divorced for 6 years, with 2 teenage daughters who were, by all accounts, much cooler than mine. She laughed easily. She drank whiskey neat. She asked me real questions, about my work, my kids, my interests, and actually waited for the answers instead of using the pauses to formulate her own points. You don't talk much, do you? She said, halfway through dinner at a Thai restaurant on 4th Avenue. I'm listening, I said. I'm a good listener. I can tell. She smiled. My ex-husband wasn't. He was always waiting for his turn to talk. It was exhausting. My ex-wife wasn't a talker either. Not about the important things. Rachel reached across the table and put her hand on mine. That must have been lonely. It was. The date ended at 10:30. She kissed me outside her car, a brief, tentative thing, the kiss of 2 people who were both aware of how much had been lost and how carefully new things must be handled. She tasted like lime and whiskey and the faint mint of the chewing gum she'd been popping all evening. I drove home with the windows down. The desert air was warm. The stars over Tucson were doing their ancient, indifferent thing. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, not joy, not excitement, but something smaller and more sustainable. Possibility. It didn't work out with Rachel. We dated for 3 months, and then she ended it, gently, via text. You're a wonderful man, Derek, but I'm not ready for what you're ready for, and I don't want to waste your time. I was disappointed but not devastated. I had survived Jessica. I could survive anything. I went on other dates. A woman named Sandra who was a landscape architect and had a laugh like a foghorn. A woman named Amy who was a retired Air Force colonel and told me war stories over burritos. A woman named Maria who was exactly my type, dark hair, sharp mind, impossible to rattle, and who I dated for 2 months before she moved to Portland for a job and we agreed, mutually and without drama, to keep it friendly. My therapist, Dr. Lamb, said I was doing well. You've processed a tremendous amount, she said. You've rebuilt your identity as a single person, as a co-parent, as a man. That's remarkable progress. It doesn't feel remarkable, I said. It feels like I'm walking around with a missing limb pretending I don't notice it. That's because grief is like that. You learn to carry it, and eventually you forget it's there, and then one day you turn a corner and it catches you off guard. That's not failure. That's just being human. Jessica married Brendan in June of the following year. A small ceremony at a vineyard in Sonoyta, about an hour outside of Tucson. She invited me, which I thought was either extraordinarily kind or extraordinarily cruel, and I agonized over whether to attend for exactly the time it took me to walk from my bedroom to my mailbox. I went. I went because Oliver was in the wedding. He was a ring bearer, wearing a little gray suit and grinning from ear to ear, and I wasn't going to miss my son's moment because of my wounded pride. I went because I wanted to show Jessica, and Brendan, and myself, that I was capable of being in the same room as the man who had destroyed my marriage without falling apart. The ceremony was beautiful. Of course it was. It was in a vineyard, for God's sake, with wildflowers in mason jars and a string quartet playing acoustic covers of songs I'd danced to with Jessica at our own wedding 12 years earlier. The officiant talked about love and commitment and second chances, and I sat in the third row next to my mother and my aunt, and I smiled because my children were watching and because, God help me, I was happy for her. Jessica looked stunning. White dress, flowers in her hair, the smile, that unguarded, radiant smile, that I had once believed belonged to me and me alone. She looked like a woman who had made an enormous, terrifying, exhilarating choice and was betting everything on it paying off. Brendan looked terrified. Which was appropriate, I thought. He should be terrified. He was marrying a woman who had left her husband of 12 years and her 2 children every other week to be with him. He was inheriting a life that was not uncomplicated. He was stepping into a family that would never fully accept him, that would always see him as the reason their world fractured, even if they never said it out loud. After the ceremony, I walked up to Jessica. I kissed her cheek. I told her she looked beautiful. Thank you, Derek, she said. Her eyes were bright with tears. Be happy, I said. That's all I've ever wanted for you. I meant it. I want to be clear about that, because the story of this marriage, the public version that people at the wedding would have seen, was that I was the wronged ex-husband, the abandoned provider, the fool who couldn't keep his wife. And maybe all of that is true. But the private version, the one I carry with me in the quiet hours, is that I loved Jessica Louise Palmer for 12 years, and loving her, even now, even after everything, is not something I regret. She made me a father. She gave me Oliver and Mia, who are the 2 best things I have ever made or will ever make in this life. She made me laugh every single day, even on the worst days, even when everything was falling apart. She made me question myself and grow and become someone harder and softer and more honest than I would have been without her. I don't forgive her for the affair. I don't think I ever will. But I forgive her for leaving. I forgive her for choosing someone else. I forgive her for not being the person I needed her to be, because she was never obligated to be that person. She was only ever obligated to be herself. And she was, to the very end, herself. Even when that self was unrecognizable to me. Even when it cost us everything. Brendan came over and put his arm around her waist. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, wariness, maybe, or gratitude, or the particular discomfort of a man who knows he is standing on contested ground. Derek, he said. Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me, I said. And then I walked back to my table, where my mother and my aunt were nursing glasses of champagne and studiously not looking at me, and I poured myself a large whiskey and raised it in the direction of the bride and groom and drank to their health, their happiness, and the strange, merciful indifference of time. It's been 3 years since the divorce. I'm 44 years old. My hair is more gray than not. I've been promoted twice since the divorce and now run a crew of 14 people on commercial construction projects across southern Arizona. I make more money than I ever have. I have a house, my own house, a 3-bedroom ranch on the east side with a pool and a backyard where Oliver and Mia have a tire swing and a vegetable garden they've planted and neglected and replanted half a dozen times. I'm not seeing anyone seriously right now. There was a woman named Diana for a while, a civil engineer who designed bridges and had opinions about structural load-bearing that I found inexplicably attractive. We dated for 5 months and then she ended things because, she said, she could tell I was still in love with my ex-wife. You're not, she said. But you carry it like you are. Like it's part of your architecture. And I don't want to compete with a ghost. I didn't argue. She was right, in her way. Jessica was part of my architecture. So was the man I was before I met her, the naive, hopeful 27-year-old who swiped right on a stranger and believed, truly believed, that love was something you could build with your hands and your heart and your willingness to show up every single day. That man is gone. But I think about him sometimes. I think about the notes on the refrigerator and the sound of Jessica laughing at her own jokes and the way Oliver looked when he was born, dark-haired and furious and absolutely perfect. I think about the first house we bought and the dog we named after a biscuit and the weekend in Sedona when we lay in bed for 2 days straight and ordered room service and read books and didn't say very much but didn't need to. I think about the person Jessica was when I met her, not the person she became. Not the woman who looked at a financial analyst from Phoenix and decided he was the answer to questions she hadn't finished asking. The person she was in that cafe on Congress Street, with her round face and her full lips and her dark eyes studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away and never stop looking. I loved that woman. I will probably love some version of that woman for the rest of my life. But I am no longer waiting for her to come back. I am no longer standing in the wreckage of our house, picking through the rubble, trying to find the piece that still fits. I have built a new house. Different foundation. Different rooms. Different furniture. Same street address, because Oliver's soccer team is in this district and Mia's friends are on this block and I am not going to uproot my children because my heart got broken. I think about what Jessica said at the kitchen table. I married the wrong person for the right reasons. I think about it more than I should. I think about how strange it is that 2 people can be wrong for each other and still make something as extraordinary as a family. How 2 people can love each other imperfectly, incompletely, in the wrong way, and still produce 2 children who are brilliant and kind and curious and entirely their own people. People who belong to no one, who are owned by no marriage, who are simply themselves, walking around in the world, carrying pieces of both of us into a future we'll never fully see. Oliver is 12 now. He's tall for his age, taller than me, which I find both thrilling and devastating. He's thoughtful and quiet and excellent at math and terrible at remembering to put his dishes in the dishwasher. He still sleeps with a stuffed animal he calls Mr. Biscuit, even though the actual Biscuit died 3 years ago and is buried under the mesquite tree in my backyard. Mia is 10. She is pure chaos, loud and fearless and forever climbing trees and starting arguments and telling knock-knock jokes that no one understands. She is, without question, the funniest person in my house, and my house has gotten significantly funnier since the divorce. They know about Brendan. They know about the affair, in the vague, age-appropriate way that children know things they are not fully old enough to understand. They've asked me questions. "Dad, why did Mom leave?" And I've answered as honestly as I know how, without blaming anyone, without poisoning them against their mother, without lying. "Your mother and I loved each other very much," I told Oliver once, when he was 11 and asked a very direct question in the car on the way home from school. But sometimes love isn't enough to keep people together. And that's not anybody's fault. It's just what happens sometimes. "Is it because we weren't enough?" he asked. I pulled the car over. I turned around and looked at my son, this small, serious boy with his mother's dark eyes and my stubborn jaw, and I said, "Oliver, listen to me. You and your sister are the best things that ever happened to me. You're the reason I get up in the morning. You're the reason I'm still standing. Do you understand that?" He nodded. He didn't say anything else. But later that night, I heard him talking to Mia in their bedroom, and he said, "Dad says we're the reason he's still standing," and Mia said, "Obviously," and they both laughed, and I stood in the hallway outside their door and cried like I hadn't cried in years. The house sold in September, 2 months after the divorce was finalized. I used my half of the equity to put a down payment on the ranch in the name of my own, sole owner, no mortgage on my happiness, no one to answer to but myself and the two people who actually matter. The first night in the new house, I sat on the back porch with a beer and watched the sun go down over the Rincon Mountains. The pool was dark. The backyard was just dirt and gravel and a few stubborn mesquites. The house smelled like fresh paint and new carpet and the particular anxiety of a man who has just bet everything on himself. It was the best night of my life. Not because I was happy, I wasn't happy, not yet, maybe not for a long time. But because I was free. Because for the first time in 12 years, I was not responsible for anyone else's happiness. I was not performing the role of husband, provider, protector, hero. I was just Derek. A 41-year-old man on a back porch in Tucson, drinking a beer, watching the sky turn colors, and knowing, truly knowing, that whatever happened next was up to me. That's the part about divorce they don't tell you about. Not the grief, not the loneliness, not the child support calculations or the custody schedules or the co-parenting app that buzzes at you at 6 a.m. with reminders about dentist appointments. The part they don't tell you about is the liberation. The strange, disorienting, almost guilty liberation of being unencumbered. Of having survived something that should have killed you and discovering, on the other side, a version of yourself you didn't know was possible. I'm still that man. For years later, still building, still running, still showing up for my kids every other week and every single day I'm supposed to. Still running in the early morning, before the sun, when the desert is quiet and the only thing I can hear is my own breathing and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Some mornings I think about Jessica. Not with anger, the anger went away somewhere around year 2, burned off like morning fog. Not with longing, I am past longing, past the specific ache of her absence. Just with a kind of settled gratitude. She gave me my children. She made me a man who could survive what I survived. And she left, which was the worst thing she could have done, and which was also, in the long run, the thing that forced me to become someone I didn't know I could be. I don't know if she reads Noah's Awakening. I don't know if she ever thinks about me at all, or if I am just a chapter in her story that she's already closed and moved past, the way you close a book and put it on a shelf and never think about it again. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if she remembers me, or if I'm a footnote in the story of her life. What matters is what I do with the time I have left. What matters is that Oliver makes it to soccer practice on Wednesdays. That Mia's knock-knock jokes get weirder and funnier every week. That I show up. That I keep showing up. That I build something, a life, a home, a future, with my own hands and my own heart and my willingness to show up every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's what she taught me, in the end. Not how to love. I knew how to love. She taught me how to let go. And I did. And I am. And I'm still here. And that's enough. That is more than enough.